Probably looking at somewhere between 15 and 20% in super prime UK being Russian owned, and I think that's a relatively strong stakeholder in the market, and it's definitely going to be an area of interest moving forward depending on what happens. Hey everyone, welcome back to another week of Super Prime UK with your Super Prime valuation specialist, myself, Rob Cohen.
Myself, James Wild.
Hope you're all well. It is an action-packed week, action-packed show, and we've got so much to share with you this week, and we're going to go straight to it, James, and let's everyone know what's been happening on the ground.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So in terms of the property transaction data for this week, new instructions have moved up slightly. We're at 295 for this week, so up on the last few weeks in terms of agents citing that being a major issue in terms of each of their office branches being the lack of stock. Sales this week are at 132, Rob, so another strong week in terms of sales. It's just fallen away slightly on the performance the last couple of weeks, but I think that's definitely within that sort of central quartile. I think on the whole positive week in terms of the sales. And you know, the market as we move through 2022, January, February, now into March, it's been very steady in terms of those weekly sales. If we look at some of the graphs, it's been quite steady weekly sales, which I think is steady performance, steady growth in the property market is what we want. We don't want this sort of boom bust cycle.
Yeah, the market is positive. The demand and supply equilibrium is functioning, which means that there is not enough stock for the amount of people that want to buy it, which is keeping a very healthy flow on market conditions, and we expect that to continue through the second quarter in first and second quarter in 2022.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And just as we move into sort of economic and fiscal policies in the UK, interest rates now likely to be held as they are for this month as a result of the sort of global market conditions as we find them. But the super prime UK property market, Rob, it often aligns itself with global market conditions, with its peak performance during the pandemic being a slight anomaly in terms of the historic trends which we've seen. And in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, are we anticipating any impact on the UK super prime market?
Well, I think super prime historically performs in uncertainty. Especially London has always been considered a safe haven, so money ploughs in to gold and stock that is considered safe in times of uncertainty and volatility, which is London prime, super prime. With everything that's happening across the world at the moment, especially through COVID, that's definitely one of the reasons why the market performed and excelled, along with obviously the race for space, as we keep discussing, and housing stock, which was in demand, and on the back of interest rates being historically low, which has been fueling property acquisition.
That's it. Thanks, Rob. In those uncertain times, often like you say, the super prime London market often performs very strongly when there's that uncertainty in terms of commodities and derivatives. Focusing on the residential London super prime sector, what is the current makeup of the super prime property sector, Rob? Which nations do the ultra high net worth individuals, where else do they come from? What's the makeup here in London?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, you're looking at China, US, India, Russia, and then Middle East, Far East, and European money is where the makeup goes. And I think when you're looking at splits, especially with the situation at the moment in Russia, you could probably looking at somewhere between 15 and 20% in super prime UK being Russian owned, and I think that's a relatively strong stakeholder in the market, and it's definitely going to be an area of interest moving forward depending on what happens.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I mean, in terms of that order there, that's roughly in terms of the order in terms of the percentages and what they own, the sort of highest highs to lows. We might have expected, or many listeners, viewers might have expected the Middle Easterns to be slightly higher on that list as they sort of dominate that Knightsbridge market.
I think they own a lot of trophy assets, a lot of signature assets in certain locations, definitely your Knightsbridge, Edgware Road, etc. So I think they're very prominent in pockets within the market, maybe not as spread as your Russian, your Chinese, your Indian, and your US super prime buyers. I think that's the major difference.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And like we say, we're going to have to monitor the market in the coming weeks and what impact the super prime market, if any, is what impact the Russian invasion of Ukraine has on the UK super prime market there. We also today, Rob, want to discuss some of the high street here in the UK as just as a subsection. The Oxford has launched its first outside of London actually in the UK in terms of its zero emission zone yesterday, restricting 8 streets in the city centre of Oxfordshire. I think, Rob, that could be something which a lot of cities are now looking at, not only in terms of doing their bit in terms of being carbon neutral, but also in terms of revenue receipts for a lot of local authorities, and at times when their budgets are quite stretched.
I think everyone's been crying out for positive and green initiatives to support the high street, and what's clear from the pandemic and what we've seen over the last two years is something needs to change, because the rates and rents for a lot of high streets up and down the country have become unaffordable, which is why so many businesses unfortunately are not trading anymore or have changed hands, and that just can't carry on. We do need the high streets up and down the country to be prospering and not left vacant as we see in many towns and cities. And I do believe that good initiatives is the way forward.
Yeah, we should add that is a pilot scheme at the moment, and I think through speaking to people in the market, some towns and cities have actually rejected these schemes in years gone by in terms of the fear of actually deterring people from visiting the town centre, which is often the hub, the high street. So how that sort of some of these traffic restrictions is going to impact on visitors to the high street at a time which is seeing lower footfall than ever, but you've got the offset against the being carbon neutral, being more green in terms of emissions, clean air. So it's a real trade-off, that, Rob. And we're going to have to wait and see if that scheme's a success and whether that is rolled out into other cities across the UK.
It's a little similar to the historic position of some towns and villages not having any chains and only having local independence. And that can work. At the same time, there's a reason why you have an anchor tenant or a chain, because that attracts people and attracts demand into an area. So again, it is a catch-22. I think that certain schemes and certain initiatives work in certain areas and some don't. And I think it's very individual.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So, still focusing on the high street, there was some research undertaken in the last couple of weeks for PwC, which cites that more than 17,000 chain outlet stores closed in Britain last year, and that's obviously the result of the trends of shopping online mainly and the impact of the pandemic. We've covered this, Rob, a couple of times, just scratched the surface, but prior to the pandemic, like we said, the high streets were struggling. There was a lot of businesses, a lot of franchises which went bust during that time. We've mentioned some of the names: Mothercare, Bon Marche, Multi-York, Toys R Us, folded, House of Fraser, rescued, and this was at a time before the pandemic which saw higher footfalls. So how is the high street going to regain some of the football? And football, sorry, we haven't got on to that yet. how can the high streets regain some of the lost footfall? And we've got to understand why some of the retail parks and out-of-town shopping have become more popular for consumers, and we need to maybe look at ways of which the town centres can serve the needs of the consumer whilst not losing some of its retail offerings.
I think, I've mentioned this numerous times on the show, how excited I am by the innovation of the high street and what that is going to look like over the next 3, 5 and 10 years, and who are going to be the winners and losers. Unfortunately, you've named a few losers where the market has dictated that they're surplus to requirements. People do not want to go to their high street and shop in some of the brands and names that you've mentioned, but there are other ones where they are strengthening their presence and they will be the winners and they will grow. And I think that's what we're going to watch. That's the trend we're looking out for, and I think that's the future of the high street, which I'm excited about.
Thanks, Rob. I mean, now there's almost a real pressing time to radically sort of reshape or even repurpose some of the high street, Rob. We've seen some of the government initiatives in terms of planning, office to resi schemes. Are we going to see even more of that, Rob?
I think we'll see every opportunistic trend or position tried and tested to find out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think we're at the peak of innovation, differentiation, change, market demands and requirements. We're in a moment in time where anything can work, and I think that is how property, real estate and sectors change and move forward.
That's it.
And that's what we're going to be exposed to, and I think that's great for the consumer, really good.
And we spoke about some of the losers there just a moment ago, some of the companies and franchises which are obviously no longer trading. But Rob, we spoke about this briefly earlier. Who's bucking the trend on the high street? Because there are some trends and brands which are, opening more stores than they're closing, certainly.
Yeah, I think there's 3 or 4 that you can see have got really positive growth strategy on the high street, whether it's your coffee shops, your bakeries, your Ollie & Stearns, your Amazons. You can just see slowly but surely a couple of restaurant chains that are slowly but surely getting their footprint out there in the marketplace and growing. Whether, again, that's sustainable, whether that's a long-term position or a short-term position, only time will tell.
Thanks, Rob. If you're watching on YouTube, we've got a graphic on the screen here which just marks some of the companies in terms of sector on most the shops which have closed versus open. So obviously fashion retails, Rob, we've got down the bottom as struggling the most. They've seen the most closures, and right at the top we've actually got takeaways have opened the most stores in terms of net. I guess people sort of working from home, ordering more sort of takeaways. We've had the new delivery services pop up the last few years, sort of Just Eat, Uber Eats, Deliveroo being one of the originals. So I think that's maybe helped that sector. Cake shops, patisseries also, that then in terms of net shop openings, they're also performing well. The only ones I was going to add was actually Primark and IKEA in terms of the high street, and IKEA certainly, as we've spoken about, Rob, maybe re-strategizing their models in terms of where they're opening stores. And 2 very different markets in terms of the out-of-town versus the high street. I mean, out-of-town has seen mostly sort of supermarkets have been hunting for new sites and opening new stores. Any others in terms of that sort of out-of-town link, Rob?
I think the out-of-town space is an interesting one because the pandemic has put people back in cars and pushed driving. And I suppose the question is that just a short-term situation? Because I get the feeling that people are coming back into the towns and the cities. I feel London is getting busier by the day. outside of the tube strikes. And I'm not convinced that the permanent nature of pure out of town is as strong and as attractive as we maybe would have thought at the peak of the pandemic and lockdowns. I think you're going to have to be a product that the consumer wants to drive to, rather than it being that's what everyone wants to be doing to drive out of town. I don't think it's a given.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Rob. I think it's very town specific and also retail park specific. And in those scenarios, I think there is more of a anchor tenant. There might be a super superstore, a super shopping store, you know, a large Tesco, a large Sainsbury's, and also those sort of out of town. I think we put Primark in the out of town sector as well, popping up on retail parks as well as on the high street, and stores which people will obviously, they'll go out of their way to visit and obviously take them to that retail park, whereby they might visit other stores, do their, you know, weekly shop and other things at that particular time. So just a quick catch up there in terms of the high street and out of town retail and sort of one versus the other, and how they're actually ever differing in terms of the market and the consumers who they are targeting. In terms of just closing off, Rob, there's an FA Cup fixture this week, FA Cup week, that you've got your eye on this week.
Big fixture. Everton, Boreham Wood, where I grew up, local team, super excited, non-league against giants of Merseyside, so big support out to Boreham Wood, and let's hope they do us proud.
That's it. We had my actually home team of Shrewsbury Town. They went out last round of the cup against Liverpool, but another Merseyside club.
Brilliant, James, as always. Great updates, great detail, great data, and great intel. As we've seen over the last few years, and now probably on a near decade, whether it's stamp duty or Brexit or elections or another election or COVID or the situation currently in Ukraine, we are living in uncertain times. I've said it time and time again. Uncertainty is without doubt the new certainty. Uncertainty is the new Uncertainty is the new certainty, and we are going to face these challenges moving on. When you think one thing is over, we're going to face the next challenge, and that is the world dynamics in 2022 moving forward, and hopefully and very positively as a community we move on together in a good, safe, positive, caring way, and we can only hope that things improve in some of the situations out there at the moment. Thanks everyone for your support, amazing engagement, thanks for watching, thanks for being on all the platforms, super grateful, really appreciate it. And we'll catch up next week. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Rob.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone.